What's up everyone? So in this video, I'll be giving a crash course in the new Rimworld console edition for complete beginners to the game. I also have a tutorial for the PC version, and I'll link that up in the corner in case you found yourself in the wrong place. The game itself is basically the same regardless of whether you're on PC or otherwise, but the UI is quite different, and since acclimating to the UI is such a big part of the game's learning curve, I wanted to remake my classic tutorial for console-only players. So today I'm playing on PS4. Obviously your actual controls will be a little bit different based on which console you're playing on, but the UI will be the same. First, I do want to mention that the in-game tutorial is pretty solid. It's fairly quick to get through, and it does a good job of quickly acclimating you to the basic features of the game, so I do highly recommend giving that a go. But let's get into it. We're going to start a new game, and when we do this, we get to choose our starting scenario. We'll be manually choosing our absolute difficulty on the next few pages, but up here it shows you the difficulty of the scenario relative to the other scenarios. For each scenario, you can read the backstory, see how many pawns you start with down here, and then within each storyteller you can tab over to see the materials you'll land with and what random resources will be scattered around the map. On the next page, you'll be picking your storyteller. This is basically the god that sends events to your colony in-game. There are three: Cassandra, Phoebe, and Randy. The main difference between them is how much time they give you between the challenges that they send your way. Up here, again, it shows you the relative difficulty of each, ranking Phoebe as the easiest, Cassandra as moderate, and Randy as the most difficult. But to be honest, I don't agree with those difficulty ratings. Phoebe generally is easier, but I think Cass and Randy are about equal. In fact, on the hardest difficulty setting, which we'll pick on the next page, I think Randy is easier than Cassandra, and I actually think that most seasoned Rimworld players would agree. Personally, Cassandra is my favorite because of how she scales the challenges up as your colony becomes more advanced. So on the next page, you'll pick your difficulty. You won't get any raids on Peaceful. I recommend Community Builder or Adventure Story for your first playthrough. Then you'll pick your save mode. You cannot reload any prior saves on Commitment mode. I know they're recommending it, but I strongly recommend Reload Anytime mode unless you're feeling particularly ambitious. On this next page, you can customize the planet you'll be crashing on. These settings will basically just affect the distribution of the different biomes your planet has. Super low rainfall would result in a mostly desert planet, for example. Up top is the world seed. You can type whatever you feel like in here, or you can just leave it. So now I have my generated planet. We can see that it's called Karen's planet for some reason. They have randomly generated names. And you can see that we are not alone on the planet. There are a ton of different factions represented by different symbols. You can open the factions menu down here to see what your starting relationship is with each faction. Hostile factions will raid you. You'll also notice all the different terrain colors and little textures. These are different biomes. If you zoom in, you can see little hexagonal map tiles. If you select one, you can see a summary of that map tile in the corner, which includes the overall move speed there, the average temperature and the temperature range, and the number of days out of the year you can grow crops. These are the most important stats, but you can open more detailed info about the map tile as well using this button. For me, it's the touchpad on the PS4 controller, which we'll see will kind of function as a more info button throughout the game. So all of this information is relevant, but again, the key things are the temperature range and the growing period, which is how many days out of the year you can expect to grow food. So you're going to pick your tile to land on, and then we will be picking the 3 colonists that we are crashing with. Up along the top of the screen, we see 8 randomly generated pawns. Since we selected the crash landed start, we'll be selecting just 3 of them to land with. If they all suck, you can hit randomize. For me, it's pressing right stick to replace the selected pawn with a random one. What we see down here is their backstory and how it affects their starting skills. These little backstories are pretty fun to read, and they help you get into the RP aspect of the game right away, but you don't actually need to read them or remember them or even pay attention to them if you don't want. Within each pawn, you need to scroll to these different tabs to view some other crucial information. The Skills tab will show you your colonist skills, which go up to 20 maximum. If they have a flame bias skill, it means they're interested in it and they'll learn it faster and enjoy doing it. A double flame means they're passionate about it, so it's an even bigger buff. You'll also see a list of traits and a section called Incapable of. Some colonists will have a dash instead of a number for a certain work type, meaning they can't do that work type. And if so, you'll see something listed under the incapable of heading. You might see violent, dumb labor, or caring in this spot. Incapable of violence means your colonists cannot fight, not even to defend themselves during a raid. Incapable of dumb labor means they won't haul items or clean. Incapable of caring means they won't tend wounds. So I highly recommend not bringing along anyone who's incapable of anything in your first landing party, because you really need all hands on deck. The next tab over will explain their traits in more detail, which is also important to take a look at. Their traits will have an effect on all aspects of gameplay, including their relationship with other colonists, their work speed, and their mental break threshold, which is basically how stressed out they have to get before they fly off the handle. The next tab over that looks like a heart has their health. Many colonists have pre-existing health conditions such as scars from previous injuries. Colonists with any injuries will be in a constant amount of pain that will affect their movement speed and mood, even if only a little. Some colonists will be addicted or withdrawing from a chemical substance, such as Benico, who is addicted to smoke leaf. Do not land with one of these pawns at first. They take a really long time to break their addiction, and they get increasingly difficult to manage as that withdrawal approaches 100%. The final tab that looks like a little genealogy tree will show their relationships, if any, with other pawns. Sometimes you'll have siblings or parents or spouses or ex-spouses in the same landing party. As you select your pawns, they will populate the team overview on the right-hand side with the max skills of your group, which is super useful. Once you've selected 3 colonists, give this a thorough look-see to make sure you're landing with at least like a 4 or 5 in construction, because you need that skill level for some important items. And I'd also try to have at least a 4 in cooking, medical, plants if you're landing somewhere you intend to farm, and someone with an interest or passion in intellectual. All right, so we're gonna get started with this group. So we've landed. Let's pause, which is down here. For me, it's R2, and I'm gonna go over the UI here. You can see our little circular selector in the middle, so rather than like controlling a cursor with the controller to select things, we're going to be moving our entire field of vision around with the joysticks to center our selector on things we want to interact with. On the right-hand side, you'll notice some information in the bottom corner. This is indicating the temperature and the terrain type of whatever point on the map my selector is over. Any colony alerts will also begin to show up on this right-hand side, like so. You can open them to read more. For me, it's R1 to open the alerts. Some of them will remain visible forever unless you address the issue, such as if you have low food, it's always going to show up low food there until you get more food into your inventory. But others will disappear after you open them up and read them. At the very bottom on the right, it will show you the date, the time, and the game speed. You can pause and unpause using the same button, but you can also increase to 2 times or 3 times speed by holding that button and tapping another. For me, it's R2 and square for 2x and R2 triangle for 3x. But let's go back to just after landing and go over how to find key information. So along the top we have our colonists. If their mood is getting low, it will be shown as the colored circle on their image. A red circle is bad news. This yellowish color is neutral, but it's not great. The circle will vanish when their mood gets above neutral. So to select a colonist, you can either zoom in to select them manually or tap one of your shortcut buttons up here. Selecting them will open up their info panel. It has an overview of their health, mood, and tells us what they're currently doing. This is not enough information though, so I'm gonna hit my touchpad to open up more info. Now we have this kind of colossal menu for her. This first icon with the smiley opens up the needs tab, which is likely where you'll spend quite a bit of time early game. It's divided into 2 tabs. The first shows you your colonist's physical needs and their overall mood level, as well as their thresholds for different types of mental breaks. During an extreme mental break, your colonist might attack another pawn or kill your pet, versus during a minor break, they might just hide in their room. Either way, it's best to try and keep their mood above those thresholds so you can avoid any breaks at all. If you scroll over to the next tab, you'll see what is affecting their mood. It shows you a breakdown of why their mood is what it is. So right now, her mood is affected by having just landed, so we have very low expectations and initial optimism. But we're also annoyed to be outside, since she has the undergrounder trait. She's also feeling a bit chilly, and she's also feeling a little bit sick. So back to our main pawn info panel, and let's look at this next icon, the little graph. Clicking this opens up their skills again. You can scroll through them to see their progress towards the next level. Tabbing over to the next screen will show you their traits again. The little heart icon once again will open their health tab, and it contains 2 info screens within it. On the first, it shows you their current physical status. You can see their move speed, manipulation, consciousness, a ton of information. If you tab sideways into the second screen, it will show you all their active health conditions and injuries in detail. So we can see that Yuki is currently suffering from crypto sleep sickness, which will go away on its own. That's just due to having been ejected during the crash. But she also has a minor artery blockage in her heart. This screen is also where you will set complex procedures to be performed on your pawns, such as amputations, prosthetic installations, administering medicinal drugs, organ transplants, and so forth. So maybe someday we'll be replacing Yuki's heart with a bionic one to fix that blockage. And to do this, you'll be using the bill option down here, but we will go over that later. The backpack icon opens their gear tab, which shows you what gear they have on, their inventory, and their comfortable temperature range. You can force them to drop anything they're wearing or they have in their inventory here as well. The speech bubble icon opens a social log that shows you any social interactions your pawn has had recently. This is really only useful for curiosity's sake. The genealogy tree icon opens up the relationships tab, which shows you their opinion of other pawns and, in parentheses, that pawn's opinion of them. It gives you a breakdown of why their relationship is what it is here. Negative interactions or negative traits will lower their opinion, but positive interactions and positive traits will raise it. This little scroll icon here opens the records panel, which shows you a bunch of info about this pawn, such as how long they've been in the colony, their number of kills, etc. You can also tab over to review their social and combat logs to see what hurt them in a battle. This button allows you to rename your pawn, and this one will banish them from the colony. And this last gear icon will open their settings. Here you can set any movement restrictions, which we'll talk about shortly. You can set their default response to threats. I recommend setting it to attack right away rather than flee. You can set any food restrictions, which again we'll talk about later, whether or not they're allowed to tend their own wounds, which I recommend turning on, and what quality medicine they're allowed to be treated with. So I know that was a lot, but that covers the pawn information tabs. So now for all the buttons you'll use to actually control your colony. You'll open what I've been calling the main menu down here, and then you'll be able to choose from a few different tabs. We'll take a look at each of them in order. The Architect tab is where you will give orders from, as well as lay the blueprint for your pawns to build everything in your colony. Within the Architect tab, the first icon is Orders, where you will find specific tasks to tell your pawn to do. So orders are sorted further into categories, and it'll become second nature soon enough to know where each order is. The first tab contains things such as mining, hauling, harvesting, chopping trees, and so forth. So to mark something to be chopped, for example, I'd choose the chop order and then select or drag over the trees I wanted chopped. So I'm not going to go through every single icon in the Architect menu right now because many of them will become self-explanatory as this tutorial continues, but I want to spend a special moment in the Zone tab to explain zones and areas. In the Zone tab, we have grow zones, stockpile zones, dumping stockpile zones, your home area, allowed areas, and roofed areas. A growing zone is pretty straightforward. Stockpile zones are areas where your pawns will store items. Food, clothing, weapons, anything that isn't nailed down. Once you create one, you have a lot of control over what is kept there. So after you click and drag to create your zone, move your little selector to hover over it, and then you'll open the storage settings with this button down here. You can now control what items are allowed to be kept here, as well as what quality of items are allowed to be kept. For example, maybe I want to keep apparel in the stockpile zone, but only apparel that is in decent shape, say over 60% hit points. I would uncheck everything except apparel, and then I would move this slider to show that I'm only accepting items between 60 and 100%. You can also set the priority of the stockpile. Maybe I want another stockpile for any extra apparel, but I'd much rather have my pawn bring apparel to this one first. So if I set the priority a bit higher, pawns will choose to carry to this stockpile first and only start filling the other stockpiles when this one is full. A dumping stockpile is a stockpile that defaults to accept corpses and chunks. Usually I toss down a dumping stockpile a bit farther from my base so colonists have somewhere to haul rocks if I ask them to. The home area is an area that by default is around structures you've built. Your pawns will only put out fires that occur within the home area and will also only clean within the home area. You can expand or shrink this manually. To shrink, you use the undo button as you see fit, but it will automatically expand as you grow your colony. Then we have allowed areas. This is a super useful tool. Let's say you want to confine a certain colonist to one area in your colony. For example, maybe I want Yuki to stay right over here. I would open up my zones menu and scroll to allowed areas. It shows you what area you're editing here. To choose a different area or create a new one, I'll press right stick. Then I can create a new allowed area, give it a recognizable name, we'll call it Yuki area, and then there are a couple ways to assign her to that area. The way we've already seen is by selecting Yuki, opening up her settings, going to movement restriction, and selecting the area that we just created. Now we'll see that Yuki is walking to this area and she's not going to leave it until I let her, unless she has a mental break. Lastly, these two buttons determine the roofed area. By default, pawns will attempt to roof any enclosed space that you create unless it's too huge and doesn't have enough supports for a ceiling. You can specify areas to roof or unroof with these options. Now let's back out to the main architect menu. The rest of these options under the architect menu are to lay blueprints for specific items in your colony to be built. We'll revisit these when we actually unpause the game shortly. But first, we're going to close out of this all together and check out our second big menu. Instead of architect, we're going to select colony. These menus will be controlling your colonist behavior. The first is the work tab, and it's where you assign different jobs to different colonists. The categories of work are along the top, organized from highest priority to lowest. By default, pawns will move from left to right across the list and complete the jobs they are assigned to. You can tab to the right to turn on manual priorities, which allows you to choose exactly how you want each pawn to prioritize different tasks. Basically, the way it works now with manual on is you can set each task to a different priority level ranging between 1 and 4 by selecting that box repeatedly. Pawns will still read the jobs from left to right, but this time they'll also take into account those numbers. So for example, with this setup, Fur would first fight any fires, then cook any food, then do any tailoring jobs that needed to be done. And only when all of that was complete would she consider all the other work types. Next in our colony menu is the schedule tab. The schedule tab allows you to set a specific schedule for your pawns. You can set time for working, recreation, and sleeping. You do this by tabbing over each hour and setting the color of that hour block based on the key at the bottom. Pawns will usually be pretty efficient even if you don't set a schedule, but if you notice them not getting enough sleep or not getting enough recreation, it's helpful to set one up. In the Assign menu, you can assign different policies to manage each colonist's allowed clothing, food, and drugs, as well as how many medkits to carry on their person. There are some default policies you can choose from, but we can also tab over and create our own policies. Basically, this first screen is where you assign policies to specific pawns, and these 3 screens are where you're going to be creating and editing those policies. For example, maybe we want to create a special outfit policy where the only type of hat allowed to be worn in the colony is a cowboy hat. I'm going to create a new policy in the Outfit tab, and then edit it to disallow all hats but cowboy hats. Then, back to my first tab, I'm going to assign that new policy to all my colonists. You can do the same with diet. By default, the lavish food policy means pawns can and will eat anything from the worst quality to the most lavish food. I recommend tabbing over to this food screen and editing the lavish policy to turn off corpses and raw meat, although sometimes in desperation, you may need to allow that food type. That's totally up to you. You can also set the drug policy for each pawn. The default is called social drugs, which basically just means that pawns with addictions to any substances can and will use those substances, but should only use beer and smoke leaf joints to relax. You can even set a schedule to allow how frequently a pawn should partake in a certain drug if you want to, or like under what mood conditions. The next icon in our colony menu opens up the animals screen. This shows what tame animals are part of your colony. We currently only have the animal we landed with, which is a horse. From this screen, you can tell pawns to slaughter your animals or release them to the wild, as well as assign them to a specific area. Some animals can be trained to help defend your colony, rescue downed pawns, and even haul items between stockpiles. So if you're fortunate enough to land with like a dog or a wolf, definitely come to this menu ASAP to set up their training. We'll also talk about how to set up an animal pen so that we have somewhere for our horse to go. Now, if we open up that main menu again, we've looked through the architect menu, we've looked through the colony menu, and next up we have the wildlife option. The wildlife tab shows you a list of all the wild animals currently on your map. From this screen, we can assign animals to be hunted or tamed by your colonists. This column shows you the percentage likelihood that that animal will attack your colonist in the event that they try to hunt them or tame them and it goes wrong. Below the wildlife option is our research menu. This shows all the research available to you in the game, starting with the low-tech stuff up at the top and getting progressively more advanced as you move down. Green items are the research that your colony has already achieved. The items with little padlocks indicate that we either don't have the correct research bench for them yet, or we haven't completed prerequisite research needed for it. In this case, everything is locked because we haven't built a research bench, but as soon as we get that down, a lot of this will unlock. Selecting a research project will tell you what items that research unlocks for your colony. So for example, if I research tree sowing, I will unlock all these types of trees that I'll be able to plant in a grow zone. I'll also then be able to research cocoa, if I so choose, which will allow me to make chocolate. The end goal is technically to make it to the bottom of this research tree and research all these different spaceship parts, assemble a ship, and launch off the planet again. Underneath research, we have this little world button. This option opens up the world menu. From here, we can open the map and form caravans, which we'll go over at the end of this video. This little filing cabinet drawer icon opens your history panel, which is a record of all the alerts you've gotten in game in case you missed something or closed something out too fast. I recommend setting it to letters and messages along the top so that everything shows up instead of just like one category. This clipboard tab shows a bunch of information about your colony, including the playtime, colony wealth, how many threats you faced, and more. And lastly, this little rocket ship icon opens the factions panel, where you can check on your relationships with the different factions again. Lastly, on our main menu here, the inventory screen is very important. This shows you a complete view of your inventory. You can choose what inventory items to pin to your screen at all times, although there's a maximum of 10 pinned items allowed. A few are pinned by default. So if I only want silver and packaged survival meals to show, I can just unpin everything else. I do wish you could pin more items, but I understand why that's not a very efficient use of space. So in our main little control menu, below everything that we've just been through, we have all these little icons. These are overlays. The first one, the sprout icon, is the fertility overlay. It shows you how fertile the land is for growing things. Obviously, you want to plant in the green or very bright green areas. This guy's face icon is the beauty overlay, and it shows you the beauty value at any given spot on your map and what's affecting it. So that helps you identify what's making your pond's environment so unbearable to them. So for example, you can see here that this vase is giving a beauty boost of 6. This little house icon is the roof overlay, and it shows what areas are roofed. Light green is a shallow or constructed roof, which means that you can remove it using that remove roof zone from the zone tab we went over earlier. A darker green means it's heavy overhead mountain like a cave and you can't remove it. We don't have any of that visible yet on this map because we haven't mined into a mountain. This overlay is important when you're mining or deconstructing buildings because you want to make sure to remove the roof before removing all the roof supports. Otherwise, it could collapse and crush or even decapitate your ponds. It's been known to happen. This last icon, the mountain, is terrain affordance. Basically, it shows you where the terrain is solid enough to support heavy structures. If there's no color showing up, you're good to build anything there, but you obviously can't build a heavy stone building in like soft sand or in a marsh, for example. So orange means that only lighter structures can be built there, and red means no building there at all. Blue is water, so you can only build bridges there. Alright, so let's get into a little gameplay here and set ourselves up to survive the first night. Right away, we can see all the items I landed with are forbidden. They have these little red X's on them. To unforbid the items, I'm going to go to the Architect menu, go to the Orders tab, and choose the Allow tool. Then I'm going to drag it over the forbidden items. You can also just select the item you want to unforbid and manually unforbid it. Next, I'm going to have my colonists equip weapons. I'm going to select a colonist, then hover over the weapon you want them to use and choose Equip. I recommend consulting their stats panel first to see if they would be best with melee or ranged. Okay, so my pawns are all stripping naked right now. I think I accidentally set up that cowboy outfit type to be only cowboy hats and no other clothes allowed. So let me just change that real quick. And they'll get redressed at their leisure now. So now that we have weapons equipped, I'm going to take a look at the map and choose where I want to set up my initial camp. An area kind of close to fertile ground and some natural cover is ideal. I'm going to turn on my fertility overlay down here to help me out. I kind of want to use these ruins eventually too, so I think I'm going to build between the ruins and this fertile area. So now that we have an area in mind, I want my colonists to start hauling all their items over here so that we can get our inventory consolidated. So I'm going to open the Architect menu again, go to the Zones menu and choose Stockpile Zone. I'll drag it to place the stockpile where I want my colonists to set up camp. Backing out of all the menus and hovering over my stockpile zone, I'm going to open up the storage options using this button and set it to allow animal corpses. Then I'm going to uncheck rotten. This way, colonists will haul any fresh kills here. If we leave rotten checked, they'll haul animal skeletons here too, which is pointless and just waste time. Now, it's important to set up a shelter right away to protect these items. If you zoom in and select them, you'll see that many of them are deteriorating due to being outdoors. If their HP gets to 0, you lose them. So let's open our architect menu and then the structure menu, which is this little brick wall icon. Here are all the structures currently available to us. I want to tell my colonists to build some walls, so I'll select wall. This button, for me, right stick, will allow you to choose what material to build out of from the materials you currently have available. Right now I just have wood, steel, or silver. Wood is highly flammable, but it's also the quickest to build, and we have a bunch already, so we're going to build out of wood and maybe eventually we'll replace with stone walls once we have some blocks. So we can drag out the blueprint for our walls and voila! You'll want to add a door as well. I dilly-dallied too long and now my colonists are passed out outside, which is not ideal. Usually you'd hope to set up this shelter before your first night, which is usually doable, but again, I've been talking too much. Once an enclosed structure is built, your colonists will automatically roof it. And now your stockpile is protected from the elements and your food is protected from wild animals. There are a few other things you should build as soon as possible to improve morale as much as possible. Beds are one of these. We'll open up the Architect tab, go to the Furniture icon, and locate beds. You can rotate them, obviously, and you can always move them later after they're built, so keep that in mind. You can also just put down a sleeping spot if you want to tell them where to sleep but don't have the material to build a proper bed yet. You should also get down a form of recreation quickly, such as a horseshoe pin for them to play horseshoes at. You'll open up the Architect menu, then you'll go to the little chess icon to open the Recreation menu. We don't have too many options right now, but we'll unlock like a television later on with more research. But for now, I'm going to place a horseshoe pin outside. It also helps to put a table and chairs down since they prefer to eat sitting at a table and get a little mood debuff every time they have to eat standing up. The table will of course also be under that furniture icon, but under the second tab. Now, since we have a livestock animal, our horse, we also need to build a pen as soon as possible. If a livestock animal goes without a pen for too long, they will wander away and lose their tameness. To build a pen, we'll open our Architect menu, go to Structures, and then go into the Farming tab here. We're going to place a pen fence and add a gate. And we're going to place a little sign called a pen marker inside of it. Once the pen is fully complete with that pen marker built, your pawn assigned to handling in the Work tab should automatically lead your livestock animals into the pen. You can get a lot of information about your pen and set specific rules for it by selecting the pen marker. This will tell you how much nutrition is growing within the pen versus how much is being consumed by pen inhabitants, aka our horse, and we can see more info by opening the farming menu. This first screen just gets into more detail about how many other animals this pen could provide for based on their daily nutrition consumption and the size of the pen. The next tab over is where you can indicate what livestock is allowed in the pen, so you can separate your livestock by species or by sex. In this last tab, you can indicate what plants you want your pawns to automatically cut down within the pen. So now we're set up to at least survive our first few nights and maybe not even be in that terrible of a mood about it. Let's look at how to begin producing more food and supplies. There are a few ways to find food. There's farming, foraging, and hunting. To start farming, throw down a growing zone. We'll get that from the Architect menu and then zones. We can click and drag to place our zone, and once it's placed, we'll interact with it and choose our crop type. Some crops require certain plant skills to be sown, but the basic crops don't need anything special. Rice is the fastest growing crop, but corn produces the most yield per harvest. I'm going to do rice. Pawns will automatically sow plants in grow zones and then automatically harvest them when they reach maturity. You won't need to mark them to be harvested. You can also forage food depending on what biome you landed in. You might have berry bushes like I do, or fruit trees. To harvest them, you can select them and choose Interact and then Harvest, or you can open up the Architect menu, then Orders, choose Harvest, and drag it over a larger group of plants. Lastly, you can hunt. You can open up that Wildlife menu and mark animals to be hunted. Your pawns will only hunt if they are both assigned to hunting in the Work tab and have a ranged weapon equipped. Make sure you have a stockpile zone that allows fresh animal corpses in the storage settings, or your pawns will just leave the animals out in the wilderness after they hunt them. So once you have some food, in our case berries, you should cook it to increase pawn's happiness and reduce the risk of food poisoning. You will need either a campfire or a stove. Let's set a campfire down. You'll find campfires in the Architect tab, but under the Power menu, and then over in the Temperature tab. So I'll set my campfire blueprint down, wait for it to be built. And now I'm going to select my campfire, and while it's selected, you'll see this option down here called Bills. Bills are how you manage production of anything in Rimworld. So you'll click Bills and you'll choose Add Bill, and then you'll get a menu of all the possible products this workstation, the campfire, can produce. Campfires have limited options, so I do recommend getting a stove as soon as possible, but we're going to choose simple meals. We've now created a bill to just cook one single meal. That's not good enough for me. So with this bill selected, we're going to open up the details by hitting that More Info button. Here, you can set how many times you want your pawns to do this bill. If you set it to do 10 times, your pawn will cook 10 meals and then be done. They'll never cook again. If you set it to do until you have 10, your pawn will cook until you have 10 meals stockpiled and then stop until your stock of meals drops below 10. They'll do their best to always keep your inventory at 10 meals in stock. If you set it to do forever, your pawns will cook until you have no more ingredients to cook with. You can also choose a certain colonist to do this task or a certain skill level required. And down here, you can also set the allowed ingredients. The bills at all production benches look the same. You'll be able to set the amount of times you want them to do the bill, as well as what materials are allowed. On a tailor bench, for example, instead of ingredient types, you'd be choosing what sort of wool and leathers are allowed. Now, my pawn assigned to cooking will get to this when they finish their higher priority tasks. If you want them to stop what they're doing and do this right now, select that pawn, then hover over the campfire, and you'll see an option to tell the pawn to prioritize cooking at the campfire. Now, if you hunted some animals, you'll need to butcher them before you can cook with them. You'll need a butchering spot or butchering table. This item and any other sort of workbench or production station can be found in the Architect menu under this production icon. This production menu is split into food workstations, crafting workstations, and research stations. The butchering spot is super fast to put down. You don't actually have to build it, but it reduces your yield by 30%. The butchering table is a better bet. Once it's placed and built, to butcher animals at it, you will need to create a bill on the butchering table just like we did on the campfire. I'm going to set this bill to do forever so that my colonist will always butcher any animal corpse that's available. You can also set what materials are allowed, just like with every other workstation. It defaults to not allow human corpses though. Depending on what sort of player you are though, you might want to change that. That's up to you. So now we have a few meals in our stockpile, but if we select them, we'll see that they're going to go bad in a matter of days. So we need to get some refrigeration going. To do that, we'll need a freezer. Let's use the structure menu to build a new room to be my freezer. And once that's done, I'm going to go into the power menu, scroll to the temperature tab, and choose this AC unit. When placing this unit, make sure the cooling side, which is the blue side, is facing into your room and the red exhaust side is facing out. You don't want the exhaust side to be facing into another room because that room is going to get really hot. Awesome, so my pawn has built our AC unit, but if we select it, we can see that it has no power. The electric bolt on it is also kind of a giveaway that something is wrong. So we need to get a source of electricity going. There are quite a few ways to generate power in Rimworld. To see them, you'll open up that Architect menu and then the Power menu. You'll only crash land with a few power sources unlocked: a wood-fired generator, a chem fuel-powered generator, which is like a gas-powered, and a wind-powered generator. You can unlock more ways, such as a water mill, solar panels, and a geothermal generator using research. We have a ton of wood at our disposal in this biome though, so we're gonna do a wood fire generator for now. So now that we have our generator built, we need to run a power conduit to our AC unit. The conduit actually just has to be close enough that our AC's little imaginary plug can reach it. So in the power menu, I'll scroll to the last tab and I'll choose power conduit. And then I'll drag to place it from my generator into my building. You can run these through walls. The AC will automatically connect to power once it's within range. And we can see now that it's hooked up because our little electric bolt went away. And if we select the AC unit, we can see how much power it's using and how much excess power we have available in our power grid currently. We can also see the temperature it's currently set to, 21 Celsius, which is about 70 Fahrenheit. You can adjust the temperature down to make it colder with these buttons that look like temperature dials. I usually set the temp to significantly below freezing, so that as pawns come and go and let a little bit of that cold air out, you can still maintain some level of refrigeration. You'll notice that the power consumption jumps up a ton once you set the temperature to be super cold. If you double wall your freezer or double door it, this will also help insulate it better, and so you'll have less temperature loss. Now you'll just put a stockpile zone inside your freezer, open up its storage settings, and set it to accept only food. Give it a high priority so that your pawns carry food here first and foremost. You might also want to set it to keep your fresh corpses in here. Now, some types of power, like a wind turbine or a solar panel, for example, will only produce electricity sometimes, like when wind is blowing or the sun is shining. So for example, I've built a solar panel here, and it's only going to generate electricity during the day. So if I choose to use one of these, you're going to need to research batteries. Once you've done that, you can build a battery and then hook it up to your power grid using a power conduit. This battery will charge when there's excess electricity. So in this case, it will charge during the day when the solar panel is generating 1700 watts. And then at night, when the solar panel is not generating anything, we can use that electricity that is built up and stored in our battery. Speaking of researching batteries, one of the first things you should get down after the absolute basics is that research bench. This is the only production item you don't need to set a bill at. You'll find it in the last tab of the production menu. As long as you have a research project assigned in the research tree, your pawns assigned to researching will work on it. Keep in mind though that research is naturally the very last priority for your pawns. So if you want a pawn to prioritize it and spend all their time on it, you're gonna need to turn on manual priorities and assign it to be a higher priority for them. Now let's take a look at some defenses, since you will get attacked sooner or later, probably sooner. Under the Architect menu, the Security menu is represented by the shield icon. Your options start out pretty limited, just sandbags and barricades and traps. Sandbags and barricades provide some cover for your pawns to duck behind during a raid. A simple wall provides more cover, so personally I prefer to just place a few walls around my perimeter at first. I'm not going to get into extensive defense strategy in this video, but a basic tip about raider behavior is that raiders will take the path of least resistance to your base. So I recommend building your base in such a way where raiders are only going to access it from one side, or even just one small entrance to serve as a choke point if you have the resources to do that. That way you can lure raiders to all approach from one spot, and that will help you place your defenses better and know exactly where to set your pawns up. There are some types of raids that won't care about this, like breach raids will just hack their way in through your walls. Some other types of raids will bombard you with mortars from a distance. Some will drop in right on top of you. But early game raids will almost always just enter from the side of the map and make a beeline for the easiest entrance to your base. Traps are another great option. The material that you use really matters though. Wood traps tend to just kind of bruise your enemies, stone traps tend to maim, and steel traps tend to kill. However, once a trap goes off, it's destroyed, so they're basically just one use. Your own colonists can also accidentally set off traps. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen, so place them wisely. You can build traps and then uninstall them once they're built and keep them in a stockpile, and then reinstall them during a raid, which can be a pretty useful strategy. Again, if you are looking forward to warfare in this game, I encourage you to search up more detailed videos about defenses. I do have a video about my favorite early game defense strategy, and I'll link that down in this video description. So now let's look at how to control pawns during a raid. When you get a raid, a message will pop up in the right-hand corner, and you can open it and it will explain what type of raid it is, and you can jump to look at them. Some raids will attack immediately. For others, it will say that the raider or the raiding group is going to prepare for a while, which is what happened in this case. To draft your colonists, you're going to select them and then choose draft. You can then direct them where to go using this button. For me, it's square. Since we have a few hours, conceivably, because our raider is going to prepare for a while, in the meantime, I'm going to build a room that I can use as a jail cell, so we have somewhere to put this raider if they survive our encounter. As the raider approaches, colonists with ranged weapons will begin shooting as soon as the enemy is within range. It helps a lot if you place them behind some cover, like these walls. If your pawn has a melee weapon, you'll have to select them and tell them to attack manually, or they're just going to stand there waiting to be attacked before they fight back. So we've downed this raider, but she's still alive, so we can capture her by selecting a pawn and then hovering over the raider and choosing Interact, Capture. You have to have a prison cell to be able to do this. It looks like our cell hasn't been completed, so we're actually not able to capture her. Let's force Fur to quickly finish up that cell. And once the room is finished, you're just going to throw down a sleeping spot in it, interact with that sleeping spot, and mark it for prisoner use. Now, this entire room is a jail cell, and we should be able to capture our downed raider. Once we've captured her, the first order of business is to tend to her injuries. We can see that my pawn assigned to doctoring is already working on tending her wounds, since I had set doctor as her highest job priority. We can look at the prisoner's health tab to see the status of her injuries, and what has been tended and what might not have been tended yet. Once she's all patched up, let's decide what to do with her. You're going to select her, open up her info panel, and then choose this first icon, which is the prisoner icon. Here we can see our options. We can do nothing, we can recruit, we can reduce resistance, release, and execute. If you want to recruit her, choose recruit. If you want to bring her resistance to 0 but aren't sure yet if you're going to recruit, just choose reduce resistance. It shows you here how much resistance she has to being recruited, and in any case, your warden is going to have to wear this down to 0 before the recruitment can actually happen. The happier the prisoner is, the easier they will be to recruit, so making prison cells really nice works in your favor, which is obviously not the case with this prison cell. If we choose to release her, we will get a relationship boost with her faction. Now, since we were just looking at the health menu, let's take this opportunity to talk about infections and diseases. When a pawn comes down with an infection or a disease, it will show up in the second tab of the health menu. If you select it and open more info, it will show you the infection or disease percentage here at the top and the immunity percentage at the bottom. It's basically a race to 100%. If immunity gets there first, you're going to be good, they'll recover, but if the disease or infection percentage gets to 100 first, the pawn's gonna die. Unlike with diseases though, you can at least save pawns that have an infection by amputating the infected body part if the infection is approaching 100 and it seems like the immunity isn't gonna catch up in time. To do this, well, in this tab, you'll create a bill. Then you'll select the operation you want to complete. In this case, it's an amputation of the left shoulder, and you will need medicine on hand to perform any of these. You can increase the speed that immunity gains by using high-quality medicine, skilled doctors, and putting your pawn in a nice hospital facility. To make a hospital, by the way, you'll want to create a room that is kept quite clean. Having steel tile floors or even sterile tiles later game will help with this. You'll also want to make sure that it's very well lit because that helps with the tend quality and operation success chance. The beds you place in here should be selected and then marked as medical beds using the Interact button. They'll turn blue to indicate that they are for medical use only. Eventually, you can research special hospital beds and vitals monitors that will boost health outcomes even more. You could even put a stockpile or a shelf in here and set it for medicine only so that your doctors have everything they need on hand right in the hospital. Now, I want to intro you to the trade menu. Periodically, traders will roam through your map, or later game they might radio down from a passing ship. You're going to select your pawn with the best social skills, then hover over the trader with the question mark by them, and select trade with so-and-so. When your pawn reaches the trader, this trade menu will pop up. Over here is how much silver your colony has, and on the left is our inventory. The grayed out items are items that the trader is uninterested in purchasing from us. Over here is how much silver the trader has, and then their inventory is on the right. To sell something, you'll select it on your inventory side and then indicate how many you want to sell. As you adjust it, the total trade amount will show down here. To buy something, on the other hand, you'll select it from their inventory and indicate how many you want to buy. The total trade amount will continue to adjust over here. This time we're going into the red since we're giving them silver for these items. You can also tab over to this present icon and offer items as gifts to try and gain some extra favor with that faction. It takes a lot to improve this significantly, so I almost never do this. Here we can see that gifting them all 25 of our precious components will only increase our relationship by 12, and that's on a 100-point scale. So we are nearly at the end of this tutorial. The very last thing I'm going to go over is how to set up a caravan. Every so often, a quest will pop up. Usually this requires that you travel on the map to a location, although if you're playing with the Royalty DLC, you'll have a lot of quests that you can complete at your home colony as well. So with one of these caravan quests though, we're going to open it up and we can see what our reward will be if we complete it. It looks like it's just a legendary spear, which usually I would never go for, but for the sake of this tutorial, I shall. We can jump to the location on the world map to see how far away it is, and our home colony is represented by this blue house. So since I want to do this quest, I'm going to zoom back in on our home colony and I'm going to start prepping for our caravan. I want my pawns to have bedrolls with them because they do use those while on caravans, so I'm going to quickly build some and then uninstall them so we can pack them on our trip. Now from our main menu, we're going to open up the world screen. You can see our colony here again, the blue house, and it is still showing us that quest location as well. I'm going to select our colony and choose Form Caravan. Next, I have to select where I want my caravan to go, so I'll select the quest location and then confirm the route. Then I'll be choosing who and what will be part of my caravan using these tabs. You should always send at least 2 pawns because if you send one and something happens to them, your caravan and everything on it is lost forever. We can also bring a pack animal, our horse, to drastically increase speed and carry capacity, but it also increases our visibility. High visibility means a greater risk of being ambushed by raiders while on our route. In the final tab here, the game auto-selects amounts of supplies to bring with you, but you can turn that off and then manually choose what to bring, which is what I like to do. As you add food to your caravan, the panel will tell you how many days of food you've packed based on how many people and animals your caravan is bringing. Once your caravan is all set up, you'll confirm it, and then back at your home base, your colonists will start packing up and head out. Once they leave your map tile, they're just going to appear as a yellow dot on the world map. You won't be able to control them again until they reach their destination, but you can select the dot to see their status. Back at our home base, the pawn who stayed behind seems to be doing just fine. So when my caravan reaches their destination, I'm going to get an alert and then I can jump straight to them. It's generated a new map for this little encounter. I can control my pawns like normal while on this map to try and complete the quest. In this case, the quest was an item stash, so we're just going to go try and find the item. There will usually be an undiscovered structure on the new map that you have to enter. Here's ours. I'm going to send Rutten in and have him pick up this legendary spear. And now I'm ready to reform my caravan and go home. If there are threats on the map, which there usually are, but not right now for some reason, you're going to have to eliminate all the threats before you can reform your caravan. But since we have no threats here, from the world screen, I'm going to select where I am right now and choose Reform Caravan. Just make sure to add the items you traveled all that way for to your packing list. So that about covers the basics you need to get decently far in Rimworld on console. I hope you found it helpful. Now, I know I have 2 separate tutorials for the PC version and console edition, but the actual gameplay is essentially the same regardless of what edition you have. So if you're interested in more Rimworld tips and tricks, feel free to check out my other videos. And if you get stuck on something and have any questions, feel free to let me know down in the comments and I will try to answer you ASAP. Thank you so much for watching and good luck out there.